I'm Jacqueline Terrebonne, the editor-in-chief of Galerie Magazine, and I'm thrilled to be joined here today with Thomas Woltz. He is a principal and owner of Nelson Bird Woltz, and he's really perfected the art of telling stories that quite literally spring from the earth. We chose him as one of our creative minds last year for that very reason. His projects include everything from a 3,000-acre New England sheep ranch to the meadow at the Naval Cemetery in Brooklyn. Thomas, thank you so much for joining us today from Charlottesville, Virginia.
Happy to join you, Jackie, and thank you for the opportunity to chat.
Of course, it looks absolutely beautiful there today. And in your lush green setting, why don't you tell us what really defines the type of landscape design that you do?
Really the grounding of our landscape architecture is in an effort to steward the narratives of land into the contemporary world. There are so many stories that are often lost over time, and those stories are grounded in both the ecological history of land, but also the social and cultural history of land, of how people have occupied land for maybe even thousands of years. And so our process really begins with asking the land extensive questions. We seek to dig as far back as we can for those narrative threads that our design work will develop. And the result of that is people who enjoy our parks and public spaces really get a sense of where they are in the world, and they start to have maybe a sense of ownership of those narratives.
One of your projects that I'm really excited about right now is the Rothko Chapel in Houston, and I can't wait for that to open. What are some of the designs and ideas that people can expect to see there in that magnificent place?
Well, the Rothko Chapel is, I think, one of the most moving spaces in America. And it really has been an emotional high point for me in going to visit those paintings for many years. And to be invited to collaborate with ARO on this project was really a true honor. The idea of the landscape there was to take this experience of the paintings and actually extend the visitor experience. So by that I mean to prepare the body for seeing this work of art, and then to hold the body after you've seen the work of art. Now that sounds very abstract. So in the literal way, what happens is you now will collect a ticket or a time for entering the chapel. You will be invited to spend time in a kind of preparation garden where you can sit quietly in the shade, meditate, and think about what you're going to see. You walk from that garden around the Barnett Newman and the reflecting pool in front of the Rothko Chapel, and then inside the chapel, spend as much time as you want with the paintings. And then when you come out, there's another garden that you can spend time and reflect on what it is you saw. One of the things I love about the Rothko Chapel and their work is that they really feel a mandate to leave the chapel changed and inspired to action. A lot of the mission of Rothko Chapel is around social equity and social justice. And so the invitation was to extend that experience for the visitor and to really inspire them using both the art, the architecture, and the landscape to inspire action.
And how did the environment and climate of Houston affect the plants and species that you decided to introduce into these gardens?
So for us, the plants and species are never disconnected from whatever the regional environment is. In a pragmatic level, it's the best way to have success with horticulture. But in a philosophical level, you're really using and showcasing the horticulture of a region and bringing that to the public. So often we have funny horticultural tastes where we want to pluck things from all over the world and bring them into our garden. And that's a great thing to do at the scale of a residential garden. But these public spaces, I think it's a wonderful tool for grounding people in the place that they actually are. So all the plants that were selected for the gardens around Rothko Chapel are native to that region, native to Houston. Some of the climatic issues that are go beyond horticultural selection are really the temperature of Houston, the shade, the humidity, the shade that's required with that humidity and sun. So to counter the intensity of heat, looking to the large live oaks that are there and creating new seating areas that will be in the shade and shelter, and really making space with plants. So this isn't a kind of garden decorated with garden beds like my house experimental garden where I'm sitting today in sequestration. The landscapes we do for our office are very, very different from my collection garden at home. In the case of the Rothko Chapel, it's really using plants to make space outdoors, and that space carries the narrative of the chapel. It carries the meditative and reflective qualities of the chapel into the landscape.
Well, that sounds definitely worth the trip once it opens. Both beautiful and spiritual, and incredible art on top of that all. Now, a project that is closer to home for me is the Vessel and the Hudson Yards project. You know, it's something in the middle of New York, and you're playing with scale in such an interesting way there. Can you tell me, what was it like to create a garden and these outdoor areas amidst such tall skyscrapers?
I think the recipe for Hudson Yards, as it relates to scale, was to rely on a sense of proportion, materials, and horticulture that were in scale to the human body. So that for the visitor, the plaza, the gardens, the trees overhead, the site furnishings, the benches, the walls, they're all in scale to our bodies. So immediately you have these elements of the natural world, stone and plants, that are brought to you at your scale that you comprehend in ways that 1,000 feet of glass and steel are impossible to compute. So we literally used the trees at the Bosque, for example, at Hudson Yards, to create a ceiling over you, a kind of continuous canopy of branches, so that you have this humanistic space that relates to you, and in some cases creates a kind of haven at the center of Hudson Yards that maybe turns its back a little bit on the monumental buildings and looks inward toward the North Gardens, toward the Bosque, and toward the Plaza. So if you notice, the plan of Hudson Yards are these giant elliptical shapes. So there's no harsh corner, there's no sharp dead end. It's always a constant flow of people and space in this large sort of, we hope, elegant kind of living room for New York. There's ample seating. You can seat several thousand people on the walls and the custom benches that we designed for the Hudson Yards. So even that, the furniture is very tactile. It's made of wood, and it's carved and sculpted to fit your body. So everything we thought about was what you touch and smell and feel, and the qualities of light, to really hold you at your scale. Because the rest of the environment is at such a different scale. It's really at the scale of the city. We wanted to be at the scale of the human individual.
And how did irrigation and rainwater come into play? You just think of all this concrete. What about the water?
Well, the water is a fascinating part of Hudson Yards because we take for granted that in large storm events, water goes into gutters and drains, and we kind of don't think about it again. Well, we had to think about it all the way to the river because the Hudson Yards is built over, nearly 30 active rail lines. So we can't penetrate the roof of the rail corridor with roots or soil or drainage or sewage or drinking water or high voltage electricity. All of those things had to be accommodated within the thick layer of the landscape itself. So it is a highly constructed nature of an unbelievable complexity. And I think, one of the most interesting aspects of the Hudson Yards project is the deep collaboration between engineering, architecture, and landscape architecture to make that public space even exist, suspended over these active rail lines. So right away, water for all of our projects as a firm committed to deep sustainability. Water is really one of the very first places we start with a project. And there we sought to capture all of the rainwater that falls on an annual basis in Hudson Yards, use all of that water for cooling, for irrigation, for fountains, so that we have designed into this sort of thickened platform over the rail are 60,000 gallon tanks that capture this rainwater and then pump it back through for irrigation. So it's at the heart of sustainability is the good stewardship of water. I think in this case, the management of it was really as a closed loop system, which is how I think we need to think about so many things in our world as closed loop systems. We value our resources when we do that. We waste less when we think about it that way. So I love that you asked that question about water.
Oh, good. And then, I mean, thinking about Hudson Yards, you know, the vessel is such a symbol of that. How did that present a challenge? And then also, how did it inspire you? How did the vessel really work into your thinking?
The vessel is the evolution of an idea that started maybe 6 years ago, which was to make a monument to the fact that this was the first tunnel that connected Manhattan to New Jersey, began at this site. This was the drill site for creating the tunnel that is still used
Wow.
for the trains leaving Penn Station, still take this tunnel. And through our historic research about the site, we discovered that this was the first site for groundbreaking to begin the tunnel excavation. And we thought, what a wonderful way to memorialize the audacious engineering of the early 1900s with the audacious engineering of the Hudson Yards project. So that narrative felt like a really great way to begin the project. So we thought of a kind of monumental spiral stair that would commemorate this site. We won this project through an invited competition. There were 3 landscape architecture firms invited to compete. And so we submitted that as our concept design. And then Related was interested in it becoming really a work of art and something much more monumental than what we had proposed. So they hired Thomas Heatherwick to evolve that into what has become the vessel, which is a much, much larger scale object than we had ever envisioned.
Right. Now, you were presented with a whole different set of challenges across the bridge off Manhattan in Brooklyn for the Brooklyn Naval Cemetery project.
Right.
What's sort of the background behind that? How did you approach that one?
That project is one very near and dear to the hearts of everyone who worked on it at Nelson-Byrd Woltz. That is a piece of land that was part of the Naval Yards and was a piece of land that couldn't really be developed because it had been the cemetery for over 3,000 bodies over time. It had begun in the 18th century as the Navy built out the Naval Yards, and it was behind the Naval Hospital, a beautiful white marble building that still exists. And so this burial ground functioned for everything from soldiers to homeless people from the region. And many of the people buried there, we do not know their names. So the idea of that project was to create a comforting memorial to the idea that we all face in the human condition of death, but to create something comforting in a connection to nature. And what we thought of was to create a meadow that would attract all of the pollinators that you possibly could to this tiny piece of land. So moths, butterflies, birds, bats, to bees, to draw all of these insects into a living meadow of native plants. And that became the idea that the thing that draws the most life comforts us in a place that was known for death. And so we were teamed with Marvel Associates on this project, and they designed the wonderful gateway, an entry piece, the threshold piece into the park. And then you have this sinuous boardwalk that kind of lazily moves through the park that you stroll on. It's lifted only 18 inches above the ground, but people really don't tread on the ground. We considered the ground sacred, even though all the bodies had been exhumed many years ago. And the Navy had subsequently used it for ball fields and all different kinds of recreational activities. But we still considered that ground sacred because it held the memory of many, many people. So that historical research and ecological research really was brought to bear in this project. Even the sinuous boardwalk is deeply inspired by an old map that shows Wallabout Creek. And Wallabout Creek was a meandering cut through the wetlands. And that form was, wow, that would make a beautiful kind of boardwalk. So in a way, it's a river of wood through a sea of grass. And it has had wonderful, great popularity. It's enjoyed great popularity with the people of the neighborhood and other people who come to see it. It's very unusual as a park space because it really is about meditation and connection with these plants. One thing that I want to add about the Brooklyn Naval Cemetery is how fantastic it is in winter.
Mm-hmm.
Our staff, in particular, Jeffrey Longhenry from our office, continues a constant dialogue with the organization and the management of it to make sure that the seed pods, the seed heads of the flowering plants, when they're all dry and brown through the winter, they're still the source of seeds and habitat for birds in wintertime. And it's a much more subtle landscape of browns and grays and tans and gold. But I find it equally beautiful to the middle of summer when it's bursting with flowers.
That's fantastic.
One thing I do want to add is that there are beehives. So there is cemetery honey, which probably has a bit of a marketing problem, but it is delicious honey, and there are multiple hives there that take advantage of all this rich biodiversity right in the heart of Brooklyn.
Well, also a good Halloween gift, though.
Yes, exactly. For your sweetie.
Exactly. It's fascinating, the research and history that you do going into a project and looking at that. And I think of those beautiful images I've seen from your projects of farmland sweeping, and it just seems so natural yet manicured. How do you approach those farms?
The farms, really, like all of our projects, we really do have a consistent approach. And that is one of listening first before designing.
Mm-hmm.
And you've hit on it. It is about looking at history. It's about reading and researching and finding letters and deeds and documents and anything we can about that place. But through that process, we're not looking to recreate a moment in history. We're looking to really get to know the land in 3 dimensions. And it infuses the contemporary response. As a modernist designer, it infuses our response with this sense of where this land has been, what it has been through, and what has shaped it. That process is equally applicable to agricultural land, because so much of our story of immigration, of First Nations peoples, these are tied to the cultivation of food. I mean, it is the first act of civilization, is how do we feed ourselves as a community? So agriculture is really at the heart of the landscape. I think Nelson Bird Woltz is somewhat unusual in that we see agriculture as an important design exercise, and we love to engage in the design of farmland, of productive landscapes. So I think we're at around 200,000 acres of agricultural land around the world that we've dealt with in this same way of large and small. And what we're really trying to do is build high-functioning, productive agricultural lands that respect and, in fact, rebuild broken ecologies. The evolution of agriculture has become one of taking huge swaths of land, draining rivers, draining wetlands, clearing forest to maximize production. And I think we've seen that's led to some very unhealthy results for the people working that land, for the water, and for the inherent biodiversity and the health of soil. So we seek to rebuild the rich, biodiverse web of life around the farmland. And then what we're seeing is that does not dramatically reduce production, and in some cases helps the production in its yields. You know, bringing beneficial insects into agricultural land sets it up as a living ecosystem. It's very hard work, and you have to be very patient with it. but the results are healthier land, healthier food, and healthier farmers working that land. We are completely ignorant of the rich biodiversity and the life that's actually in soil, the fungal relationships, the life that's inside soil. If we use fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides and we kill that life in the soil, the plants that grow there are almost like drug addicts dependent on fertilizers. So we can break that whole system by enriching and bringing life back to the soil through building its biology.
That's fascinating.
That's probably a lot longer answer than you wanted about farming, but
no, that's
a passion
the
of mine.
answer that makes me want to read more and learn more, because you're creating these vital ecosystems, and at the same time, every time I see an image of one of them, they just look like the most beautiful, serene painting of what farm life once was.
I will admit that we try to bring an artful eye to everything we make. Even our highly engineered landscapes or productive landscapes, they can also be heart-crushingly beautiful.
They are. If you're just joining us now, I'm Jacqueline Terrebonne, the editor-in-chief of Galerie Magazine, and I'm talking to one of our creative minds, Thomas Woltz. I want to remind everyone to please follow us on Instagram and like us on Facebook. And Thomas, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more. Tell us about the garden where you're sitting now and about what you've created for yourself in Charlottesville.
The garden I'm sequestered in. I was joking with someone recently. My now ex-wife and I bought this house 20 years ago, and it was a sloping lawn from the street to the back fence, and it had 3 trees on it. So everything here I've planted over the past 20 years, and do the maintenance and pruning and hedging and mowing and weeding. And it is very different from the things that Nelson Bird Woltz designs for our public parks. It's been an interesting experiment to see what can one man sustain and maintain on a half acre in a city. And I've really used this garden,
man, but okay.
I've really used this garden as an experimental ground, which is why when you suggested that we have this conversation in my garden, I thought, oh no, this is not really a show garden, but it is a place that I love and a place that I've enjoyed engaging with because it's my experimental ground. When I hear about interesting plants or I want to try plant combinations that I wouldn't dare experiment with on a client, I can put 5 different blues together of perennials and see what that looks like. Is it horrible or is it fabulous? And it's been 20 years of experimenting with plants. Also hedging plants into these living walls. When we bought this house, we could barely afford it, and to renovate it, it was needed a lot of work, new roof, all new plumbing, all new electricity. And so we had really no budget for the gardens. So I ordered boxes of bare root plants that generally are used for the nursery trade, nurseries that buy in really tiny plants and then grow them to large plants for sale. And so I ordered several hundred European hornbeam and planted them at various distances apart, 18 inches, 24 inches, 30 inches, grew them into hedges and sheared them to see what was the optimum planting distance to make these hedges. So I'm surrounded by living experiments, some successful and some not so successful, but it's been a really fun way to have a living laboratory at home.
And what are some of the things that are coming alive and coming into bloom right now in spring? What's the garden like in spring there?
Right now I'm surrounded by Tradescantia, Brunera, Iris, peonies, Phacelia, which is a fascinating native plant that is an annual, and it bears live seed right after it flowers, which means that seed falls to the ground and starts to grow and blooms the following year. The seed is not viable for very long, so it's not something you could put in packets and sell and could be sold months later. You have to get the living seed into the ground right away, and that's what's blooming just behind me here in front of the stone wall I built. So also my vegetables are coming up. So I jokingly said, because of my travel requirements as the owner of a landscape architecture firm, I travel more than half the year. I jokingly said to a friend last week that my garden thought I'd died and the ghost of me just came through on holidays every now and then to visit, and now it knows I'm here, because every day from 6 to 8 I'm in the garden working, and was able to plant my vegetable garden for the first time in several years. So I have fantastic butter crunch lettuce and red onions and chard and bok choy and spinach and peas and potatoes, carrots and beets, all coming up right now. So I'm already eating lettuces out of the garden. So it's been my real solace during the sequestration of COVID-19.
Well, you're staying healthy. That's good to hear, that you aren't carbo loading like the rest of us.
Oh, I'll probably have my COVID-19 by the end of this.
Okay. As long as you're making carrot cake or something like that.
Oh, I made a Southern buttermilk lemon cake last week, and I've made, in 8 weeks, I've made 6 chocolate cakes and have eaten them all.
Okay, that is also
and
something else.
And the lime tart.
Oh my gosh.
I like dessert.
Very impressive, very impressive. And then what are some of the other outstanding features that you love about your garden? Any special spaces or beds that you've carved out that you're particularly proud of?
Yes, Jackie. I think it's the using plants to make space in a small urban garden. So as I mentioned, we really had no budget for this garden. So the walls and rooms are made of plants, and they were plants that cost $1.30 each, and now they've grown into these beautiful living walls. So I took the ½ acre of grass and really made 4 rooms. There's a circular room in the front, right on the street, where hundreds of cars go by a day and you can't see any of them. And it has a massive oak tree in this circle. And so that's a place to have outdoor dinner parties, cocktail parties. It's a really wonderful kind of outdoor living room. And then if you move down the side of the house, you come to the perennial garden where I'm sitting today. And this is really experimenting with flowering plants, lots of color. It's a square garden room with about a 10-foot deep perennial border all the way around it that's constantly evolving and changing. To the back of the house is a 75-foot long rectangular bowling green, just a flat green lawn with European hornbeam hedges to either side, so you have that sense of being in a room. And then the very back room is a large elliptical lawn surrounded by a shrub collection of native and non-native flowering shrubs. And then the far back corner at the intersection of native and non-native is my vegetable garden, because that's exactly what vegetables are. They're hybridized plants that we've brought from all around the world to feed ourselves. So that's the essential layout of my little home garden.
That's absolutely incredible that you fit all of that in there, and what a delight that you can actually spend so much time with it when you're usually traveling the world to work on all of your fantastic projects. Thank you so much, Thomas, for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Of course, of course. You are such a creative mind. You are really one of Gallery's leading lights of people that we featured. What you do is absolutely incredible. So thank you, Thomas. For everyone joining us today, please remember to follow Galerie Magazine on Instagram and like us on Facebook. And of course, go to our website, galeriemagazine.com, to read more about Thomas and other creative minds. Thank you so much.
This is Cindy Allen, Editor-in-Chief of Interior Design Magazine, and we are back yet again with my dear friend, Suzie Williford, the EVP and Chief Strategy Officer. I say she's the queen of the National Kitchen and Bath Association, who, by the way, have 50,000 members strong. Hi, Suzie.
Hi, Cindy.
So I'm so happy to see you, Suzie. And I know, like at Interior Design, the NKBA stays current by providing critical and timely information to their members because of their strong commitment to research. And this time you brought along some of your design members to share the results of some important NKBA research. So give us a breakdown of the research.
I'm so glad to have this premier group of designers here with me today. And yes, the NKBA has made a significant investment in research to provide our members and the industry as a whole with important data that impacts their businesses.
Yes.
You know, every year we field a couple of studies that track the kitchen and bath industry. Our biggest and arguably our most important has been the kitchen and bath market outlook.
Yes.
It scales and sizes the remodeling sector with an emphasis on the kitchen and the bath. And also on a quarterly basis, we update the market outlook with our kitchen and bath market index, also known now as KBMI. This helps us keep a finger on the pulse of what's happening in real time, which is very unique in the research world. We also track design trends. This one is super important because a number of our industry manufacturers use this to help drive their product and development plans as if what the market is looking for. And this year we've added a new one. It's called the Living Impacts Design, and it's a lifestyle and life stages study. So we're looking out 3 years and asking designers, manufacturers, showrooms, and remodelers to share what they believe are important, big, hairy things that will impact design. This is lots and lots of good stuff.
Yeah, it is. And you know, like with interior design, just like the NKBA, we really believe that being current is providing critical and timely information for your members, right? And so I think all of the research that you're doing is super important, super kudos for all that. And now a new one. Like when you do a new one, it's like, whoa, you know, right? Like how do we get the industry a little bit different? And in some kind of strange way, it happened at such a unique time period, right?
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, it's
but like you were saying, one of the reasons why, you know, you do such an amazing job of getting information out there to the entire design world. That's why we're such a good partnership, you know. And now our annual design trend focuses on the what of design. New paint colors, new finishes, design style preferences, contemporary, traditional, that kind of thing. This study focuses on the why behind design decisions and really looks for the motivations behind certain design elements. It's about how people live and feel in their kitchen and their baths, which is our priority.
Yeah, and you know, that's the thing too. It's kind of like right now, with what we're all going through, we are all living in our kitchens and our baths almost 24 hours a day. And we have new perspectives, and it's so interesting that it's happening now.
Exactly. But what's interesting is this study was done pre-pandemic. And the results are actually reinforcing what's happening now. So it's real insightful.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Okay, so I want to dive in. Just to remind everybody, it's called Living Impacts Design. Okay, so let's keep that, Living Impacts Design. All right, so we're so happy that we have some special guests. Suzie, you've brought along a few NKBA design members. Hi, design members. We have Kerrie from Kerrie Design Lab, Sarah Robertson, AKBD from Studio Dearborn, and Laurence Carr from Laurence Carr Design. Thank you all for joining us. All right, so we're going to start with you, Kerrie. And I hear that you collaborated with the NKBA to develop the Living Impacts Design research. And it seemed like it was a big group that participated, and you came out with some big macro themes.
We sure did, and it was great. We had 750 respondents, and that was from everyone in the industry: designers, manufacturers, kitchen and bath specialists, dealers, showrooms, and those 4 macro trends. Can I tell you what they are?
Tell me. Yeah.
So we have connected living, simplified living, healthy living, and living in place, which all totally apply today.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. You hear that and you're going, oh my God, that is absolutely now. And I imagine that just the age difference also shifts how the perspectives are. So what were the ages in the groups?
So we had millennials age 23 to 38 without any kids, millennials with kids, Gen Xers 39 to 54, boomers 55 to 73, and then our silent or greatest generation, which was 74 and up.
Mm. And how did it impact you as a designer, digging into this research and hearing from so many people?
You know, it reinforced a lot of things. Being in California, we think we know this certain version of design, but to hear about it throughout the country is a whole other story. And so we were really able to capture different demographics through age. And then we also discovered this isn't only a lifestyle study, it's a life stage study. And we're seeing that come out in form following function and some other things, especially with the connected home that I'm sure you'll be excited to report on.
Yeah, okay, so each of you are going to talk about one of the themes. And Kerrie, we're going to start with you. Your theme for, and everyone, living impacts design. So the first theme is connected living. And we know technology plays a big part in staying connected, but it's definitely more than just that.
Yeah, so connected with technology, connected with people now more than ever, and then really connected to outdoors, which I know you're so passionate about as well. But when it comes to the kitchen, we're talking about open layouts so people can truly engage with everyone in their space, multifunctional areas that are designated for cooking and working at home, and now apparently doing homework with kids.
Oh my God, isn't that crazy? It's so crazy. I feel so sensitive and feel so empathetic with people, you know, with families with kids and moms trying to do this and then take care of your kid. It's crazy.
Absolutely. And another layer of it is just having those multi-use charging outlets so we can have that juice going at all times and be connected to people in our projects. We want to be able to find recipes and watch cooking videos and just be inspired in general.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm hearing you, and so I'm thinking, okay, our kitchen was first our office. Now we've moved it into an office. But the kitchen definitely was being plugged in all over the place. As my husband was listening to Jenny Can Cook and making bread for the first time, and he's Italian, he instinctively knows how to, and now we have bread all the time. Like every single thing is happening. It's like you guys were way ahead of your time, Suzie.
Well, and one more thing in that space, as you're doing all these things, we want large windows. And that's for daylighting, of course, but also to open up for ventilation, get that fresh air, get that vitamin D. So that was another part of the connected kitchen that really struck a nerve, for sure.
Right, so, okay, so I want to ask you, so you're talking about connected living, and I'm thinking, all right, so how are we really staying connected in the bathroom, Kerrie?
Okay, so just think about that voice automated showers and multitask features again. So where our mirrors are giving us the news or listening to music or even watching a video when you're in the tub. And then on top of that, when it comes to lighting, which we've discovered is so important, especially on calls like this, to have that integrated lighting through sensor or through just a touchless version of it.
And let me ask you as a designer, so like, let's talk about maybe a project that you could compare it with. Are your clients like very open to all the connectivity in the bathroom now? Are you starting to specify new things that you hadn't in the past?
Yeah, I think that's where value as a designer comes in, is they think they want one thing and we make them aware of what's available to them. So we're adding in little layers as we go, and as our manufacturers have this incredible innovation going along that speaks to wellness too, which I know we'll talk about today.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. Okay, so Sarah is next. Hi, Sarah, how are you?
Doing great.
Yeah, we had a great talk at KBIS. And I understand that you are a master in storage, by the way, which everyone is also like hearing from designers are either baking or organizing. It's one of the two. So you must be very, very popular. You should start a show. But so our second is simplified living, which is connected to this connected living. But talk to us about simplified living.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many commonalities between connected living and simplified living. But what we're seeing, of course, on both of those trends is that walls are coming down and windows are getting larger. And generally speaking, you know, we're losing cabinetry, or we're intentionally taking cabinetry away to open up our spaces to other things. So what's important to think about then is as we lose the quantity of cabinetry, we have to be really thoughtful about the way each cabinet's designed, what's going into that cabinet, how's it being used, who's using the cabinet, what times of day. And it becomes kind of it's a new challenge for the kitchen designer really to be maximizing what they have left once we really open up the kitchen.
Are you like that type of person? You always were very organized?
Oh, that's such a good question.
Yeah.
I think I'm a bit ADHD actually. So I think organization for me is kind of my way of battling that. So I've always been, the person who wanted to have my drawers really well organized, in my dorm room, all buttoned up and neat. So I'm not exactly OCD, but I love knowing where things are. I feel like it just helps me get through the day.
I just can't imagine, like, as that tool, that's a big tool to go to a client. They must all go crazy over that once they know that you can help them, because it is chaos that we live in, and trying to organize it in your home is such a reflection of like having a healthy lifestyle, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's such an interesting point, because essentially, our lives are chaotic. The earth, the world is a chaotic place, right? And for humans, we find comfort in kind of taming that chaos. And so we have to think about the way we work as designers, that's part of our role, is helping our clients to tame that and to really be able to get that sense of comfort out of having things organized and having things, you go back to the simplified living of having a place for everything. I think about it as that old saying, a place for everything and everything in its place.
Exactly. So if you just joined us, I just want to check in with everybody. We're having a lively conversation with the NKBA and some design members on a very topical and interesting research that just happened. It's called Living Impacts Design. Okay, so we're keeping that umbrella, right? Thank you, Sarah. And now we're up to Laurence. How are you?
I'm great, thank you.
This is a pretty deep topic that we're talking about, which is healthy living, because healthy means a lot of different things. And
Yes.
it's something that we're all dealing with right now, just in terms of stress and chaos and being home. Talk to us a little bit about that.
So in this research, healthy living relates to the importance of being connected to nature, which, is really part of that research. And we actually really experience this right now within this situation, how important it is to be connected to nature. So for a long time, the biophilia and circadian rhythm were more commonly used in the hospitality design. However, now it's very much part of residential design vocabulary. So as for biophilia, we know that we humans depend on our interaction with nature, and the natural world, bring a sense of calm and well-being. So bringing nature into the home is multisensory experience. And as for the circadian rhythm, what we see is that clients who tend more and more to gravitate towards larger windows, because seeing the light change throughout the day help them keep their body circadian system in check.
So we have biophilia, then we
Yes.
have circadian rhythm.
Yes.
And now let's talk about what's happening in the bathroom.
Yes. So that sense of simplification means that a retreat or an escape, in fact, the bathroom is a retreat or an escape. So are bathrooms the new wellness sanctuaries? Yes, they are, because they contribute to heal the body and also release stress. So how does this translate in design? We see more seats in the tubs and in showers. We find heated floors, also soaking tubs, and steam and thermostatic showers, as well as UV filters in lighting to remove toxins from the air. And all of these different elements promote the sense of healing and wellness.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And it's so true. We're talking about that more than ever. Let's face it. We've been dealing with health and wellness maybe for the past 10 years. And now it will be in a much more meaningful and deeper way. And now, for us at least, health and wellness will be in every project. Every project will be talking about that. So I'm so glad we're discussing that today. So let's move on, Laurence, to the kitchen, because healthy kitchen is not just about eating better, although that's a good part of it, but being more thoughtful about the environment. So why don't you talk to us about that?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, clients are learning about the impact their food choices have on health and the importance of food and preparation choices. So for healthy living, what we found is that we have larger refrigerators to store produce with smart temperature storage. We also have flexible refrigerators drawers separated into unique temperature, humidity, and light categories. And we have larger sinks to wash fresh fruit and vegetables, as well as larger prep spaces for built-in shop. And as well as for being environmentally conscious, there is a higher demand definitely of seamless separation between the indoor and outdoor and maximizing daylighting for that feeling of connected living. But also we find more recycling and more composting in the kitchen, as well as induction cooking and speed ovens. And we also have water conserving faucets and dishwashers, and the use of reclaimed wood and metals. And then if we just touch up on this resilient design, which is, intentional design of building landscapes and communities to respond to natural and man-made disasters, we see really a focus on optimizing on-site renewable energy, as well as carrying out water conservation practices and maintaining on-premises non-perishable food supply practices.
I wonder, you guys, if you're like, because when you start to see the research and a lot of things, you're like, oh my God, I am doing that, or I'm starting to work on that with a client. But other areas where maybe it's giving you good information to bring to the client as well.
Yes, yes. To actually guide our clients, identify their needs and guide them towards making these choices so they can really serve them for their comfort, their well-being, putting health in front of the project.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing time in so many different ways, but that is one good thing coming out of it, right?
Yes.
That we can live a more healthy existence, spiritually, emotionally, physically, all of those things, and design, and we need design for that, which is fantastic. Okay, so sorry, stop blabbering. Cindy, let's go to the fourth macro theme, living in place. Okay, Suzie, take this one away for us.
I know, after listening to Laurence talk, I just love to hear her talk. I mean, like, just keep going.
I know, Susie's like,
So now you have to hear Texas instead of this beautiful European accent. Oh, well, Laurence. Living in place, this is a philosophy about designing spaces that work for everybody, no matter their ability or their age. We have multiple generations living together now, people in their living rooms and homes that are all living there longer. Different ages, different skill sets, cooking together in the kitchen. So what do you need? You need countertops with different heights. You need your spaces to be wheelchair accessible. You need cabinetry and appliances that can be modified over time as people's ability and sizes change. You need extra wide doorways and walkways and ample lighting. There was a time in my life where we had to totally redo a place because of a change in our lifestyle, and we couldn't get through the doors with the wheelchair. Very important. In the bathroom, non-slip flooring or seats in the shower that allow people independence. Decorative grab bars, things that can be both functional and beautiful. And then heated flooring for many reasons, not to mention comfort.
Right. I heard from this wonderful healthcare designer, and she was telling me something that I feel so strongly about too, which is like, so she's been in healthcare for her whole career, right? And so she said that, it's our responsibility, because you're talking about some things that aren't sexy, let's face it.
Right.
She said it's our responsibility as designers to make sure it's still beautiful. You know, everyone wants to talk about antimicrobial right now, but like we need to make it beautiful because we don't want to go back. We can't go backwards. We're design, you know, you're design people. You can't go backwards. It's sort of like we need to take all this up a notch, and manufacturers make it up a notch and all those things. How do you guys feel about that?
Well, I'm just going to say that I think our members, our manufacturer members, have done a phenomenal job of making beautiful bidet seats, beautiful seats in the shower, made out of teak wood, things that are durable, things are safe, and they're beautiful. So, you know, kudos to them. They listen to the design community. I'm not a designer. We have the experts here. We can get their
That's exactly what I was going to say, that it's what a blessing that we've really come, the distance between the manufacturer and the designer is so much closer now. They're really tapping us and asking our opinions and having us be a part of that design and product development process. And I think that's where a lot of the innovation is coming from.
I completely agree. And I do think that the manufacturers and the designers are like so tight right now. And we're seeing such beauty. We just have to be on it, especially in places where it was okay in the past not to look so good, not anymore, right? We all say no. We all say no to that. Laurence, you were going to say something.
Yes, I was about to say, people spend more time home as well. And so they really have time to understand what they like, what they don't like, and how much they hate this, you know, bedroom, bathroom, kitchen. And so their sense of aesthetic is actually really developing, you know, and more choices as well. And I wanted to add on the sustainable, you know, thoughtful for the environment. We really see manufacturers now really not only really pushing the envelope with upcycling and circular, you know, furniture and furnishings, but also let's just keep the beauty of it. Let's, you know, it can be functional for the environment and for wellness and health, but it can also still be beautiful. This is what we do. Aesthetics, you know, beauty contributes to well-being.
Absolutely, that's our responsibility. We're going to giving a round of applause to the manufacturers right now. Round of applause, round of applause. Absolutely, I think we're on that trajectory, and it's just there's so many other kind of health issues that we've never faced before, and we have that responsibility. You all have that responsibility to get us past this and on to the next great thing, which I believe you all will. And certainly it's so interesting, Suzie, that this research is timed so perfectly and completely aligned with what's going on.
No, thank you. This research, the amount of time and effort that we put into it and money to make sure that we can put back the information that's needed, quite honestly, just to brag a little bit, it's been noticed now by the national press, by some of the larger investment groups that are looking to us now to give them the information that they need to make decisions for business going forward. But, you know, not only kudos to our manufacturers, also kudos to our design community,
For sure.
Because a lot of times they have ideas or creative juices are flowing that they could keep to themselves, but they share. And because they share, it's something that can be given to everyone. I mean, even like when they enter on their design awards, Sarah was a big winner this year. And she had so many inspirational ideas that you put out there when you enter a contest that now you're sharing, right?
Yes.
So it's all pretty wonderful. And you know, I'm real proud of what we do. And the NKBA, what we live to do is to connect the design community with the manufacturing community and the remodeling community. We are a connector, and it's proven now that works.
I completely agree. And designers, you know, you all have my hearts, and it is so it's so touching actually just to see how much everyone is really coming together in a much more meaningful and deeper way. So this was really good stuff. Thank you all so much. I want to thank the guests, our NKBA members, designers, Sarah, who won big this year, Sarah Robertson. Thank you so much. Kerrie Kelly, who really helped with the research. Thank you. Laurence Carr, the most beautiful accent, and we have to meet up in New York. And of course, Suzie Williford, you're amazing. Now, we just scratched the surface on the research, and there's more data. You can purchase a copy on the NKBA website, nkba.org/store. I think I got that right, Suzie?
You did.
Okay, all right. So design, living impacts design for sure. And we need that to move forward. So I want to thank all of you. God bless you all. Stay safe and keep designing. Go forth and design.
Thank
Have
you.
a good one.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the Metropolis Forum's webinar on designing spaces for public good. I'm Rajagopal, the editor-in-chief of Metropolis. We're all learning a thing or two right now about acting for the public good, right? I mean, we wear masks or we wash our hands, not just because it keeps us safe as individuals, but because it benefits society in general. How can we learn to design from that mindset too? I think that's one of the questions that we're all asking ourselves during this pandemic. Can we think beyond clients and stakeholders and even end users and design each space as though we were creating it for the benefit of society as a whole? Well, today we're going to talk to some architects and designers who do just that, work with tight budgets, sometimes risk-averse clients, to create some remarkable workplaces, facilities, and spaces that are in the public domain. How have they innovated with civic architecture, and what lessons can we learn from them that apply to the private sector workplaces and all the other kinds of spaces we design as well? To answer that question, we have an amazing group of speakers today. Thank you so much for joining us. Joseph Coriati, who's the managing partner at Frederick Fisher & Partners. Hi, Joe. We have with us James Kruger, who's design principal at HMC Architects. Hey, James, thank you for joining us. Also with us is Jose Sama, who's partner and design leader at NBBJ. Hi, Jose. And Julie Snow, who's the founding principal and CEO of Snow Acrylic Architects. Thanks so much for joining us, Julie. Julie, I'd like to start with you. You know, your firm, based out of Minneapolis, is known for bringing real humanity to public architecture. You know, the Van Buren Port of Entry building, which won a slew of awards, opened at a time when immigration was really a hot button topic in 2016. And then more recently, your Metro Transit Police Department building, which we showed in the May issue of Metropolis, comes in the wake of a lot of attention around policing in this country, of course. You know, you're walking into some really difficult contexts and projects. Tell us how you approach those issues with your work.
Well, I think there's two things to say here. Is one, all of our clients, all of these public clients tend to be very mission driven. And what we found is that if we can create comfortable, safe, secure, accessible, and convenient workplaces, that pretty much that's their checklist. And if we can then follow up, we have clients that tend to be relatively enlightened, that they understand that if somebody comes into their world and they're tense and anxious, good things are not going to happen. So I think one of the things that we found is that a lot of our work is intended to reflect community values. So for instance, the land port of entry in Van Buren was really based on a lot of understanding of the sort of regional culture. And that was brought into the design. So in a sense, our public buildings represent our public values. And so if we can create that, plus we can kind of take a little bit of tension off the authoritarian place, I think that does a lot to make our clients' jobs a lot easier.
Right. I think it's really interesting that you talk about sort of local sort of specificity as well. You know, very often when we're talking about civic architecture, we forget that, that's also, it has to be really grounded in place for it to successfully mediate, as you said, between the authorities and society at large. I think there's a really interesting dynamic between universal public values and some very local, specific context there. That's really interesting.
Yeah, I think we also do a lot in terms of reflecting broader community values, which I think it's a lot about creating authoritarian places that are also accessible. And so the idea of having something that's transparent to people is take some of the, again, the tension out of the situation.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we can all learn a thing or two, I think, better now about taking the tension out of situations. It's something we all need to learn to do. Joe, the Santa Monica City Services building, which was set to open on Earth Day. I know that's a little delayed because, of course, COVID-19 and other things. Is the first municipal building in the country, I think, to be that is on track to be Living Building Challenge certified. That's a very high bar for sustainability. Why should we set a high bar for civic architecture? Where often budgets are tight, it's hard to push for high performance. Why do public spaces need to be as high performance as some of the more big budget, high investment architecture that we all do?
First of all, thanks, Avi, for including us in the discussion. I think it's so important today, maybe more than ever, if you see what's going on in our world, for the public to understand the relationship between the built environment and our community. And like Julie said, for those that don't know, Santa Monica is a very participatory community. And in fact, our ability to help provide through transparency, figuratively and literally, a connection to the built environment. And for Santa Monica to be an example, in this case in the civic building, to bring people together to a location. A number of these people have been working in disparate locations around downtown Santa Monica to bring everybody together to help them do a better job serving the community. And most importantly, in this case, the connection to resilience and sustainability in the community, especially with what's going on this very moment, and their commitment in a way to put their money where their mouth is. The city had recently enacted legislation to mandate net zero energy and water in some of their projects, and to do it in a way, and we spent a lot of time working with the city and various groups to look at what the level of sustainability and resilience would be. And they made a commitment at the executive and staff level, council, to go to a level which was very challenging. And I think it's about an example to the community that doing the right thing is important. If you look at the 2030 AIA standards, it's kind of showtime for us. And I think as design professionals and civic leaders, for us to be in the forefront and helping make things happen. And so that bar has to be high, and it's for the public good. It's for the development of the future generations.
Right. I mean, of course, as you said, certain places like California have, aligned themselves with those sustainability standards that they recognize are for the public good. I mean, I think in other places, maybe it's the coin has yet to drop. But I think, across the board, I think there's a recognition that, sustainability is one of the important ways in which we do design for the public good. And, setting some of those standards might also create an opportunity to connect with what Julie was saying, for the authorities, so to speak, to have a better relationship with the public too, through more enlightened spaces. Jose, I'd like to come to you next. You work in NBBJ's healthcare practice, and of course, I'm sure you're you're involved in some interesting things right now on that front. But you also were involved in designing the Denny substation in Seattle, which also we featured in our issue. And that was an example where, you know, you layered this public space over basically a piece of infrastructure that wasn't necessarily accessible to the public. It was a, you know, power utility building. What insights do you cross over from your healthcare work to your civic work? And I think, you know, especially at this time where I think all of us are thinking about those two things in conjunction, you know, what do you take from one type of practice to the other?
That's a good question. And thanks again for the invite to participate. I get asked that a fair bit in terms of like your focus on healthcare. So you're a healthcare architect. The understanding is that potentially you won't be able to address other issues or other architecture types. But by training, all of us as architects know how to look at a problem, understand a problem, and bring creative solutions to it. And when this came up as an opportunity to basically put a substation in the middle of a downtown, I figured, what the heck, it can't be that hard. So I really seized upon it. But the thing was, for us as a studio, it was an opportunity to help resolve some of this issues of bringing infrastructure into the public realm. Luckily for us, the city of Seattle has a very progressive process for when you do this. When you basically bring something like this kind of a facility, there's this public benefit component that has to be factored into it. So we had to work very carefully with our client around the fact that you're taking out a street. We vacated a street in order to do this. We in turn have to come up with something for the public. So in healthcare, we focus a great deal on the public well-being, the patient well-being. So we basically looked at this problem from a public well-being and looked at opportunities in the public realm that we could resolve some of that. And that is manifested itself in the parks, the community center as part of it, the linear park that basically surrounds it. There are different amenities that help resolve that.
Yeah, I think that question about well-being is really interesting. You know, again, connecting to what Julie and Joe were also talking about, you know, very often in the private sector, when we're talking about well-being, you know, whether it's through standards like the Well-Being Standard, or, you know, LEED now has a new, you know, Healthy Buildings initiative, you know, and so, but we're often, you know, kind of, I feel like the majority of those conversations centered around immediate users of the building, right? So let's define a community of people who are the primary stakeholders. Let's address their needs first. It's much more complex to think about, oh, wait, anybody could walk into this building and it must serve them as well as it serves the people who use it day in and day out. And I think that's a slightly more complex proposition for architecture that I think, you know, in the public realm, in parks and in streetscapes and things like that, people are used to dealing with that. Maybe, you know, in healthcare, for instance, there's certainly some of that, you know, you could have people walk in all the time, but it's still something I think we're trying to figure out, you know, how can we talk about public health in really convincing terms when we talk about, you know, just all types of architecture. James, I think actually that's a great spot to bring you in. You know, your work spans many different types of civic architecture, community centers, correctional facilities, again, a very like fraught building type, libraries, and of course schools, because you also have an education practice. Is there that, you know, some kind of concern around public good, a methodology or a tool that you use in your civic work that you think we should all be taking more seriously now, no matter what type of architecture that we're engaged in?
Yeah, sure. Great question. And again, thanks for the invite. You know, our civic clients, it's interesting. They are actually some of our more progressive, forward-looking, you know, clients. Someone else, I think Julie had mentioned that too. And it's great because they start with net zero and they start with, you know, LEED gold as like a baseline and expect platinum. Whereas some of our other clients maybe aren't as far along. And so the priorities are sort of set from the outset, which then we design, you know, from that point forward, which is, I think, pretty awesome. It's a non-negotiable, which is pretty great. So that's where we would love to see, and where we try to push into those other markets and take that expertise. We did our first net zero building a couple of years ago, and that was a big deal for us with the County of San Diego at a Live Well Center in Oceanside. And prior to that, we did the Women's Detention Facility with the same client, which was a LEED gold project, not net zero, but edging on it. So we've kind of been building that portfolio with that client, and it's been a great client for us. We see a lot of change happening, as we all see in these markets, in all of our markets. We focus on healthcare, civic and education work, and we see the conversation kind of shifting a little bit. The idea of social distancing becoming really more about physical distancing, and really that we need that social component, that we're all kind of yearning for that, and that it's really a refocus, and the words do matter that you use. But that social connectedness and the ability for our civic projects, especially, to build that through our public spaces that we design. So we pay a lot of attention to those spaces and really make them sort of sticky spaces that really attract folks. And now with the new 6-foot world that we live in, what does that mean for design? And those are the new design challenges that I think we're all pretty excited about. And you know, I don't think it's going to be going anywhere anytime soon. This is going to be sticking with us for some time. So how we react to these things and how we kind of strategize and, you know, work with each other and work with communities to make them part of that, you know, dialogue, I think that's all critical.
Right. So I think there's several things in what you just said. I think the baseline of, you know, talking about, okay, what are some of the non-negotiable aspects of this project? I think those non-negotiables are going to start to spread to many other types of projects as well. You know, we've been talking about infection control, for instance, spreading from healthcare to workplaces. You know, everybody's thinking of that now. But then, you know, again, what COVID-19 I think has really brought home is, you know, there's many different communities of stakeholders, many different communities of people that we might not be considering. And so what we consider baseline for projects hopefully is going to shift. And, you know, hopefully we'll all be part of that change here. Related to that, you know, we have a question here from the audience. James, quick shout out to you. Suhilti says, thank you, James, for saying physical distancing versus social distancing. I think that's an idea that we're going to come back to later today, because, you know, as we're discovering, you know, one of the aspects of public good that we as designers are often tasked with is, you know, addressing those social connections. We have a question today from Arlen Solacek, who says, who gets to define public good? I worked in the public sector, and we often were against taxpayers who financed the project, but felt that every public penny spent is a penny wasted. This is a common, I'm sure, thing that you all have come up against in your projects. Anybody want to take a response to that? You know, how do we build a common sense of the public good so that, you know, people understand that it's something that needs to be invested in?
I'll take that, because the public gets to decide. We as designers don't come in and necessarily drive that. And in the substation in particular, there were numerous meetings with the community at large to gauge general interest and where we should focus our energies in terms of amenities within that realm. That being said, the substation, all it needed to really do was provide 4 walls and make them look good. I mean, at its bare essence. The community and what they were asking really created something that was above and beyond that, okay? But the community involvement is what helped us define what was good for the public. And what we needed to do was listen and then come up with a creative solution that responded to that.
Joe, do you have a reaction to that with your experience with the city?
Yes, I think our experience has been that, and this really needs to be, I think, in civic architecture. Ideally, it's less about a heroic vision for an architecture firm and more about how you engage the community. Certainly for the Santa Monica City Hall East, as it's known, is about connection to the community through transparency, through access. It's an addition to the existing Santa Monica City Hall, which is the crown jewel, which is located in part of the Santa Monica Civic Center, which has had a 20-year rebirth, Tongva Park by James Corner, the Rand Corporation, a number of diverse housing, and bringing those pieces together that happened over a long period of time where the community that was very active was able to have a voice, and having the community understand the relationship between what's there and what happens there, and in this case, governance. In our Annenberg Community Beach House that was done some years ago has made a spot where it was about people making memories and people being able to participate in diverse and equitable access to the ocean. And I think that that's the other part now as we talk about inclusivity and how we have this kind of civic architecture be really in the public realm, and how important that is, and not about the kind of Acropolis version. Maybe the public forum is really important. And I think that that's really critical. I really liked what Julie said about taking the authority out and making places benign. And that's, I think, a fundamental part of what needs to happen.
Right. I'm going to take a question from William Chu, which I think is connected, Joe, to what you just said. But I think James and Julie, you might have something to add here too. William Chu asks, what strategies or tools are there to promote inclusivity in designing the public good? And how do you avoid either having a vocal minority hijack a project or design with an invisible marginalized group in mind? Now, I'll just, if you will permit me to editorialize, I think that's a fear in doing what Jose suggested, right? Like really opening up to the public, is that, you know, somebody with a loud voice or a soapbox to stand on can hijack that process, so to speak. Is that a real fear? And, you know, how do we, or do you have examples where you've built safeguards so that, you know, interests that might otherwise be invisible or unvoiced are also safeguarded?
Yeah, I'll kind of jump in. You know, it's unavoidable. There's always that guy or gal in the room that kind of capitalizes on the conversation and kind of has a lot to say and maybe not a lot to say at the same time. And so, you know, at the end of the day, they need to feel like they've been heard, right? You can't ignore them. You can't set them aside. You can't marginalize their comments and sort of put it off to the side. You have to really put it down on paper. So that's what we do in those kinds of situations. We have the big notepads and we collect everyone's thoughts. At the end of the meeting, we put them into buckets and we kind of, you know, come up with our guiding principles for what we all believe as a room, as a community, are important about that project, and things that don't fall into those buckets kind of do get, you know, put into the parking lot, so to speak. But it's addressed right then and there in the room, and it's, you know, you can't hide from it. You have to address it, and you just you look at it, you know, head on. That's how we do it anyway.
Julie, how do you deal with sort of not opposing but strong interests in or you know, strong opinions?
There's a couple strategies I think that are really important. One is having public engagement specialists as part of your team. And that I think is really helpful in terms of having somebody that can stand basically in front of the community and ask them the questions that need to be asked. The other strategy that I think has been very helpful when we've done some parks here in Minneapolis, is to have a community engagement group headed by an individual and allowing that community member to temper the outliers. So it's not, it wouldn't be our responsibility to do that.
Right. I mean, I think, you know, that's interesting. It's like relying basically on structures that communities have already built, you know, rather than, you know, starting from scratch. So, you know, if people have come together, formed an association that's been organically formed, and they do have a spokesperson or leader, it is fine to trust that person rather than saying, okay, now I need to get every single stakeholder in the room at the same time. I think that's really valuable insight as well. So, you know, this idea of inclusivity, I think there's many shades to it, and there's a whole spectrum to it. I'd like to take a question here. There's a couple of questions about budgets, you know, but Katie Hall has, what if public or political support and budget for the project does not support the goals of sustainability and quality in the project, regardless of it being for the public good? In Eugene, Oregon, we deal with severely under-budgeted projects because the local public does not support what they call showy projects. The 2009 recession goals of do more with less is still a mantra. And I think that's a real fear, right? We're going into another recession, our budgets are going to go down again. And are the things that we've fought so hard for, you know, public space, sustainability, inclusivity, diversity, and so on, are those going to, you know, be redlined on a budget? Go ahead.
We're kind of shy.
Well, the budget side of it is really challenging, but we like to think in working with our project team, it's really about how do you consider wellness and lifestyle, and ideally not necessarily about the bells and whistles. And so Santa Monica City Hall happens to be in a very benign, wonderful climate, you know, a couple hundred yards from the Pacific Ocean. And we were really able to take advantage of that. The building is long and narrow because it was a bit of a leftover site. And I think if we apply common sense principles that relate to the specifics of that context and the lifestyle of the people that are going to be in the building, it answers the question of who are we really designing for? Ideally, it's the users of the building. The Santa Monica, the City Hall East, it is an essential building. There are a number of things that made it more expensive than a typical office building, but there are a number of things which relate to kind of common sense, natural ventilation, abundant natural light, being able to harvest sunlight. Those kind of things make sense. And so how do we work with the context, the local place, the elements that are going to be the most beneficial at a relatively modest budget? It's tricky. Now, we've all seen throughout, I think, North America, budget everywhere, the cost of construction because of lack of capacity, et cetera. Maybe we're going to see an adjustment to that now to some degree.
Okay. Anybody else have a thought on budgets?
Yeah, you know, one of the things that I think is interesting is a sense that design is extravagant. And I think one of the things that we have always felt about our own work is that it has a level of restraint. And so when it operates in the public realm, it represents values and it respects the fact that these are public funds that are supporting it. So having some level of restraint doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be seen as an extravagance or an expensive building. On the other hand, we did do a project that when it won a design award, the project manager kind of held his head down and said, "Oh, I don't know how I'm going to live this down at the office. They'll think I spent too much money." So that sense of design equating to cash is not a good, it's a false connection. We have to get rid of that.
Right. Good design doesn't cost more. right? I think there's something about what you say about restraint, though, Julie, and I think all the work that all four of you have done, that quality of restraint is really runs through all your projects. I mean, even the Denny substation, which is really such a generous public space, it's still quite restrained, and I think there is that sense of maybe humility that public spaces need to kind of telegraph to people. We have a question, speaking of, spaces like that. Jay Nordberg asks, to James's point of designing for physical distancing, do you expect more outdoor design needs? That's easier, of course, in places like Southern California, but can be a strong consideration for other environments. I mean, all of us are wondering what's going to happen to the outdoor realm. How is it going to come through? So James, any initial thoughts on that? And then we'll take others in as well.
Sure. Yeah, we're studying that right now, actually. We are lucky in Southern California, especially in San Diego County, to have very mild weather, similar to Santa Monica. So, we're looking right now at places where we can expand to have, half as many kids in the classroom. So maybe half come to the outside space, and which then triggers more of a focus on outdoor learning environments, which we've been personally pushing as an industry and also as a firm for many, many years. We believe in them. We want to create more of them and fund them. So it's maybe a little selfish talking about it that way, but it's definitely a worthwhile endeavor. There's spaces directly outside of classrooms. There's multi-purpose spaces. There's cafeterias that should not just be used for 1 hour during the day. They should be used all day long for instruction. Outdoor shade canopies, you name it. So on schools, that's a huge push for us right now that we're currently studying with a number of clients, and we're excited for the opportunity to look at things with a fresh lens. It's sometimes these terrible situations create these silver linings, and it's another opportunity.
I would hope
Jose,
that.
How are you thinking? Yeah.
Well, I would hope that more than anything, this changes the dialogue around programming at the beginning, because we always think about programming for the building, for the users, for the inside, and very little thought goes into programming the surroundings. Most clients see that as potentially, I can save money here on a landscape design or something like that. So the fact that it's inside outside, and we need to rely more on our outdoor environment more than ever now, will change that dialogue with our clients to recognize the importance of programming for outdoor uses, which is something we actually, particular to Denny Substation, we took really to heart as part of thinking about trying to program every inch of the spaces, the outdoor spaces, that is.
Right. Jose, I just want to stay with you for a second more. I think this question of outdoor spaces is also coming up, I'm sure, in the healthcare world, right? There's a lot of large healthcare facilities that are thinking of outdoor spaces as sort of public realm, as ways of staying engaged with the community around them by offering sort of this green space and so on. And yet, conversely, just a couple of days ago, I was pitched a project where the hospital said they had a courtyard, but it was inaccessible. It provided light to the space around it, but they made it inaccessible to reduce the risk of infection, and contamination of people walking through the space, which seems such a weird idea to me. So I just want to talk about for a second public space in healthcare as well.
That's a great question. It's not so much just to think about it in terms of the public need, but also of the caregiver needs. What they're going through, as you're seeing, is very traumatic, and the need for them to have a place to go to reflect and decompress from a lot of the tension that they're going through is something that we're now beginning to talk about more and more in our programming efforts. The arousal fatigue parts of this. So there are conditions that we need to consider when we're designing outdoor spaces. For instance, you could do an elevated, green roof. However, if that environment is adjacent to patient rooms, there's this issue of privacy. There's a lot of factors that go into designing outdoor spaces for healthcare environments. But one thing that we're also discussing is how do we actually encourage the public to participate in these environments, rather than coming to the hospital because you need, be seen by a physician or have a procedure, but you're actually engaging in that environment because it's something positive to it. It's a positive environment to walk through on my way to somewhere else. Trying to engage that conversation is one that we're starting to do slowly as a community. But for the most part, we're thinking about it both for the patients, the staff, as well as the general public, and opportunities there. It is true to say that most healthcare organizations don't have a lot in terms of resources or capital to just do grandiose public environments. They've got a lot on their hands right now, but we look for opportunities where we can actually provide those kinds of amenities.
Okay. Another question about amenities. In just a second, we're here talking about designing spaces for the public good. We have Joe Cariati from Frederick Fisher & Partners, James Kruger from HMC Architects, Jose Sama from NBBJ, and Julie Snow from Snow Acrylic Architects. So designers from all over the country joining us today. We're talking about how can we create better spaces for public realm. We've discussed many amazing ideas around public engagement and community engagement and what processes work there, about setting the bar on sustainability and how that can help, talking about budgets, and just now talking about outdoor spaces as well. So, if you've joined in late or you've asked us a question that's related to one of those, we have addressed them, and you should be able to hear what our panelists said when we rebroadcast this on Thursday on Metropolis's website as well as on Facebook. We'll also be sharing out links to all of you as participants in this webinar, so you can go back to it at any point in time. I have a fun question from Angela Adams. We'll get back to sort of more hardcore architectural concerns, but she's asking about what is the benefit of including public art in civic projects. I think there's, just as we're talking about green space, I think civic architecture has been a great supporter of the arts and has been, one of the main sources of keeping artist communities and creative communities thriving. So if any of you has a take on that, we'd love to hear. Go ahead, Joe.
That's really a great question. And I think it's really important to look at the public realm as an opportunity for art. And we have a long history of collaborating with artists. So for the City Hall East, Susan Narduli has created a couple of pieces. One is installed in the first floor of the building as one-stop shopping for permitting, plan check, paying fees, etc. And the long counter, which is developed as the public interface, the screen in behind it is a piece by her. And to make it so it's integrated into the architecture, starting early in the design process. At the Annenberg Beach House, we worked with Roy McMakin, and Roy was actually part of the site planning and the development of the overall strategy. It brings a different level, I think, a layer of thought to the project. You never know what kind of idea that an artist is going to have in part of the conversation. And I think it starts to break down those institutional barriers that you would often see in civic work. And so it's not just placing a piece in the plaza, but it's making an integral part of the experience, appreciation of day-to-day life, I think.
Mm-hmm. I would guess that public artists would have the same idea about their art as every artist, which is that in a way, art is there to challenge us and to create new experiences. And I think public art has the particular role of maybe spurring connection between people. And we did a sculpture garden in Minneapolis in which you're all the time, it's outdoors and it's publicly accessible. And you're seeing so many people there enjoying the art, talking about it, engaging with it, that really don't know one another. And so I see it as a provocation to get to know your fellow citizens, maybe if just briefly.
Yeah. I mean, I think as I said, starting this conversation out, one of the effects of this pandemic has been that we are thinking of our fellow citizens so much more. And I think having those more opportunities for those kinds of mediated encounters is amazing. And yes, you know, I think we need more investment in public art in the civic realm than maybe even we had in the past. I have a question here from Kitty Yuen, and you know, James, maybe you want to take this on, and then we'll go through the group. With the current situation in the US, the community is looking to access public spaces to take a break from staying from home. So of course, everybody is kind of like itching to go out to the parks, itching to go out in the public realm.
Yeah.
Looking back at your projects, what can you add, or what would you modify in some of the civic projects that you've done that would encourage people to get back outside? We're certainly going to need some of that thinking. How can we coax people? How can we make them feel more secure? And how can we give them reasons to go outside and engage with the public realm?
Yeah, it's interesting. As soon as something's taken away, how quickly people are to pine to the public parks were, not as well traveled, 3 months ago as they are as of like last weekend. So, but it's a great thing, right? Because it's re-engaging. It's reminding people like these are great spaces. Let's make them even better. That goes for public parks, state beaches, boardwalks, you name it. So so the things that we would look at in a project like that is large open spaces where people can gather, that have artwork that can be talked about. I think Julie's comment about that really being sort of a thread that kind of binds people together, disparate kind of groups, and really is a way to really get dialogue kind of started is an awesome thing. On a lot of projects that we work on, we look to tap into local artists that are local to that specific community, so they get exposure and promote their work, but also gets the community talking about the community's art. And so those spaces are critical. So big plazas that have green and hardscape spaces, places to sit and spread out. Safety is a huge concern. So at night, how are those spaces used? How are they accommodating during the day, but also how do they prevent people from sleeping in them at night? There's things that considerations that need to be made so that the safety is not overlooked.
Right. I think absolutely. We want the public realm. We want civic spaces to be, and now increasingly private sector spaces to be open, to be welcoming, to be inclusive. But certainly, there's a safety concern, as you said, from a security point of view, right? When there's all kinds of people, they're bringing their own life experiences and their own baggage to whatever way that they're engaging with that space, and you can't always control that. But now, of course, there's a dominant sort of public health concern as well, around how we keep people safe in spaces. We had a question early on from Jorge Zapata that I'd love to just bring to the group. And Jose, this might be a good question for you to start on. How can we face a new hygienist paradigm, he says, without repeating the elitism that characterized movements like that in previous centuries? So in the history of architecture, the Spanish flu, the TB scare, that got us modern architecture, it got us hygienic spaces, it got us whatever, but there was definitely a certain, you know, people who can afford it get healthier spaces kind of attitude, right? I think there were a lot of expense to modernist architecture as it was practiced in the mid-century. How do we keep people healthy but kind of keep it egalitarian, I guess? How are you thinking about that even within the healthcare space? You know, how do we not just focus on the very high-end, you know, hospital systems, but rather also look at more egalitarian ways of bringing health to people?
Well, a lot of that goes beyond the hospital realm to the clinics and the other sort of healthcare environments that occur at the community level. So in terms of when we're designing for spaces, so as we say, medical office buildings or those kinds of environments, that make sure that we have access, hospitals have access to that. Within the hospital itself, there is no distinction of high-end versus none. It's always accessible regardless. And all of it is designed to the same level of concern for the patient, despite whatever, you know, social economic conditions may be. So I'm not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Joe, you wanted to come in?
Well, I think it's a really important question. So in the Living Building Challenge, healthy materials are a major part of that. So this project is not done by a single person sitting in an office. It's a huge team sport. We're working with Burrow Happold, who is our MEP engineer, and the contractor, Hathaway Dinwiddie. And the healthy materials are really important in terms of not only for the occupants of the building and the things related to being hygienic, but the materials of the way they're produced in the factories and for the people that are installing those materials. And for the LBC, Living Building Challenge, it's about addressing the material red list. And if there was a single item on that project, and the City Hall was a challenge for the design, the construction team, was to understand how to vet those materials, how to encourage a material supplier vendor to bring new materials to the marketplace. So this, I think, interesting moment in time. I know that the U.S. Green Building Council is starting to emphasize that, as well as ILFI, who monitors the LBC, and get our industry to understand the critical nature of those materials, and our consultants, contractor, what they have to go through with material vendors, subcontractors, to bring the industry along and make demands that those kind of materials are used in the marketplace. And so now with maintenance and what we're experiencing with C19, I think it's going to bring that to a forefront.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, I think that's a reminder of, you know, how public good doesn't necessarily mean designing, you know, big public spaces and outdoor spaces and things like that, or investing in public art, or having giant community engagement processes. It certainly involves all of those things, but there are some basic things that we all can do in every project, which is, you know, choosing the materials that we specify with sensitivity to where they're made and how those communities that they're made in are treated, and so on and so forth. There's a growing understanding that the impact of any single building is not just on the people who use it or even the people who walk into it, but rather all the people who are involved in the supply chain of having that building go up. And that's huge. That's a worldwide network for any single building. And, you know, that's a huge place where we can have public impact. Everybody who's joining us, we've had some really interesting questions, I think, on all the different ways in which we can keep the public good in mind while designing spaces, both private sector and civic spaces. We've talked about engagement, we've talked about well-being, we've talked about outdoor spaces, we've just touched on materiality, which happens to be a rather favorite one of mine, public art, as well as, you know, keeping an egalitarian sort of attitude of being inclusive with design. It's been a fantastic conversation with Joe Huriati from Frederick Fish and Partners, Julie Snow from Snowflake Architects, Jose Sama from NBBJ, and James Kruger from HMC Architects. I'd like to take, just just a few questions in more rapidly here. There's a question about, HVAC systems in buildings. And I think it's interesting because to Joe's point about, all those building systems, building materials also being sites where we can make a difference to the public good. Kenneth Chong asked, in modernity, we've been heavily reliant on HVAC systems to help our buildings breathe and deal with climatic conditions. Vernacular sensibilities with respect to local materials and local specific construction methods have enabled buildings to interact more respectfully with their immediate environments. Do the speakers see significant changes in the ways we've been putting buildings together in terms of methods, materials, and standardization? If anybody has an example of, building systems and how we can, maybe adapt those to serve public benefit, I'd love to hear.
Avi, I would say that the less we rely on mechanical systems, probably the better. It might be different in healthcare, but to make it so that it, again, is consistent with the context, natural ventilation, natural lighting, maybe less reliance on forced air. So for the Santa Monica, one of the ways we were able to keep energy uses down is we have very little forced air, only in high occupancy spaces. It's radiant heating and cooling. So being, again, we have a relatively benign climate that might not work in the other parts of the country, but just common sense, simple solutions, keeping it straightforward and figuring out how to work with the, engineers and contractor, supplier vendors to make it fit within those parameters.
Right. I have a question here from Bonnie McKay, who says, a big issue in the development of access for people with disabilities. I'm surprised how many buildings are not totally welcoming, from wayfinding to bathrooms to elevators. Sustainability seems to be a priority, but how does someone with disability move through spaces? This was, of course, we're in the 30th year of the Americans with Disabilities Act. It was actually, I think, passed by the House on just a few days ago, 30 years ago, in 1990. So we've come a long way in looking at people with different needs, with diverse needs, with different abilities, both physical abilities as well as mental health, neurodiversity, all of those things. How are you thinking about accessibility in your projects? If anybody would like to jump in on that, that would be great.
I think one of the most interesting things recently is creating rooms that have are less stimulating environments that will allow people that are sensitive to noises or whatever to be able to enjoy our public spaces. So that's one of the developments I think is quite interesting. My daughter does autism work, so I think it's a pretty potent idea.
Right. There's been a lot of talk about sensory intelligence. Go ahead, James.
Sorry, I should have raised my hand. We're seeing similar things on the K-12 side. We've done a lot of just had a lot of discussions and been reading a lot of research about kids that have adverse childhood experiences and the need for spaces that they can decompress, reading nooks, places to pull away and sort of be a little more, just one-on-one, and what a huge impact that has on the ability for someone to reset and then re-engage. So we're seeing that quite a bit on the K-12 side as well. Just wanted to mention.
Right. We have a couple of questions here that go back to that question of cost, and I'd love to. I know we're flogging that horse here, but I think it's a real concern, and I think as many people who have not been engaged with civic architecture come into that space, they're working with stereotypes that public budgets are tight, or that they're placed under higher scrutiny than on private sector projects. Jacqueline Addy asked, how do you combat the concept of good design not necessarily having a high price tag? How do you start to have that conversation with communities? How do you show them the possibilities of design? Jose, maybe you want to comment on that based on your experience.
You're going to say that. I think it's a matter of trust. I mean, if there's this level of distrust around what you're going to do with your design that is potentially not being mindful of costs, you've got to get beyond that. And part of that, I believe, is making sure that they understand that you're aware of their concerns, that you're addressing their specific requirements. For instance, on the substation, there was a period where we needed to build the trust with our client that we were actually going to not get in the way of the actually building a efficient substation, right? Once we got past that, they were more open-minded about opportunities to take little portions or aspects of that substation for the public well-being. But first we were mindful of their concerns and making sure that we're within their cost constraints. So I think it's trust. And part of that is demonstrating that early on in the project to the public as well as to your client.
Right. We're going to take just a couple more questions here. Again, thank you so much to our panelists for staying on a little bit longer than the scheduled time. Alejandro Stochetti asked, what should be the role of public authorities to require public good strategies, that is investment in the public good, from the private sector? So, you know, how do we make investment in the public realm? I mean, obviously we don't want to mandate it, but, you know, how do we encourage it from private individuals? And, or are you seeing hopeful signs in that regard? James, maybe you want to comment on that, and then Julie can jump on too.
Actually, no, I don't have much to add to that. Maybe Julie does. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, how do we get the private sector to engage with the idea of the public realm?
You know, let me take a stab. How about that? We've done a number of projects in the city of Minneapolis in which we've encouraged our clients to provide sort of sheltered off the sidewalk public spaces in the middle of their project. And it's usually associated with some retail function. But it's also the idea, and these are housing projects, for instance, where you really you're creating a more vibrant urban space if you have an active public realm. And you know, you see the retail sales go up, you see the occupancy go up, and so it feels to me like that's kind of a case that you need to build for every project you do. And it's can be an economic case, it can be a energy vibe that you want for the project, but to me it's it usually has to do with creating a design that we're almost asked for that with its transparency and so I think there's a number of different strategies, but I think it's almost case by case, and it has you need to speak the language of your client to make a case for it.
Right, absolutely. I think that's really important. Our upcoming issue, which deals with workplace, we actually are talking about some firms that are involved in real estate repositioning projects. Of course, this was pre-COVID, but updated for a post-COVID world, and how much of that working with private real estate clients, how many conversations have really been about public space and the power of public space to keep tenants engaged, to keep buildings vibrant, to keep retail going, as you said, Julie. I think so. Speaking the language of the client, I think is really important. And so it's less about any public authorities mandating, but more about building the case for it, as you said. We're going to take just one more question here. Samara Croce asked, how can we think about the public good of future generations? The current community might not be the same in 10 years. How do you include this in the design of public spaces? And I'd love for all of you to come in on that. how do you, there's a lot of talk about future-proofing the workplace, future-proofing healthcare spaces. Everybody talks about the lifespan of a healthcare space and before it needs to be renovated and so on and so forth. I mean, other sectors I feel like think of that, yet in the public realm, we somehow think we need to design it and it needs to stand for 100 years, you know? So how do we address this idea of the future proofing when we're designing civic architecture? You know, how do we create buildings that stay relevant over time?
Yeah, I'm going to just float an idea, which I think is, I mean, I think this is the very case made for resilience of our public buildings, that you design for a loose fit so that it can morph and change, and different relationships could be created within the structure. But I also think you have to create projects that endure and transcend architectural trends and strategies. So I think there's a number. I mean, I think that's a really complicated question, to be honest. I think you need to build well, and so there's a lot of different pieces to that. But I think ultimately, I think designing kind of a loose fit, and then designing something that is enduring and beautiful.
Yeah,
Joe, and then James.
Say that I think that the element of keeping things timeless and not focused on stylistic solutions, we're interested in thinking, and we try to talk about not designing a building, but designing a place, and have that place be connected and relevant to the city, and so that there's always this an interaction, and having it that Julie mentioned the loose fit is more flexible and adaptable. And we're seeing some of our clients now, we do a fair amount of work in the academic world and looking at how spaces that are used, were originally designed for one thing, can now be adapted to something else, and allow the building to be flexible and not so custom that it's handcuffed.
Right, right.
Yeah, I mean, another word to encapsulate that is agility, right? Like, so in K-12, we're designing spaces where kids are learning, training for jobs that don't exist yet, right? So how do you create a space for that? It comes back to flexibility. It's walls that can move, furniture systems that are modular and flexible. The ability right now for classrooms to sort of shrink in capacity, but grow in space, if that makes sense. So we have fewer kids in the same space, and allows spaces to move and flex and change over time to have completely different uses in the future. Agility is the way we kind of encapsulate that.
One component that it's not architecture related, because it's very quick for you to sort of think about it in terms of in the architecture world, is the stewardship. And when you think about public spaces, there has to be stewardship of those surrounding it, those that live at its edges, that they will take ownership and maintain the importance of that space. That's something that we as architects, can't design for. That's a social construct that needs to be in place. But you can be part of that conversation to make sure that you've created something that they will take stewardship of.
Right. I think that's a fantastic set of ideas to end this conversation on. Julie, you were talking about resilience and loose fit. Joe, you were talking about a sense of timelessness. James, you talked about agility, so flexibility and adaptability. And Jose, that idea of stewardship. I might steal that one. It's just, I think we don't often design for with the idea that will this building or will this space continue to be loved and cared for, right? We think a lot about whether it will stay relevant or useful, but hopefully we're hoping to do a little more than that, even if we don't always admit it. And I think this has been a fantastic conversation, and all of those ideas, of course, are applicable to any of the work that all of us do, even if we're not necessarily engaged in civic work. They're just such important ideas for us to carry into a post-COVID-19 world. Again, thank you all so much for sharing your insights, for taking on some some pretty complex and large questions on this panel. But that's the nature of setting high goals and lofty aims for the work that we do, and we would never get anywhere if we didn't do that. Thank you all for all the attendees today for participating. Thank you all so much for your questions. We had many more questions that we could have possibly answered in this hour and a little over an hour, but I think you will find that a lot of the major topics that all of you brought up were addressed in this conversation by our panelists. Thank you all to our panelists for joining this conversation. Next week, we're going to be talking about something a little different. We're going to be talking about technology and architecture and design and how that stands to change in a post-pandemic world. We have an amazing set of panelists there, including the Chief Technology Officer at SOM. So anybody who wants to sign on, registration will be open tomorrow. So you should be able to register for that webinar as well. And I hope we see you all next week. Thank you again, and have a great evening.
Great.